We'll start off with Peter Johnson. Peter? Again, 3 minutes.
Yes. My name is Peter Johnson. I looked at their drawings. They haven't changed anything. One thing about Eversource is they lied to us about going underneath the Milford ramps. They had no permission ever to go under there, and they never did go under there. And the other thing is, we aren't getting this, I'm the Norwalk Shellfish Commission, we aren't getting this until November. We're supposed to try and make decisions when people may be signing off on things before then. I mean, something's wrong here. They're pushing something before we even get a chance to look at anything. And they haven't made a decision. They showed 10 options that you can go either any way you want. They're showing the options, but they choose the shortest way. And if they go through under that cable, you will never be able to move them pilings unless you get permission from them if you want to change your configuration. And I can guarantee that, because they even said it at the last meeting. And I hope the mayor doesn't sign anything yet until we go through everything.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Steve Arkash.
Yeah, I'll hold for Q&A, thank you.
Okay. That'll be at the end of all presentation.
That's fine.
Okay. Mr. Pinto, John.
I'll hold question and answer period because I'm going to respond to the Eversource's current design, which we don't know anything about yet. I'm with the North Harbor Management Commission.
Okay. Jackie Lightfield.
I'll defer to the Q&A.
Okay.
There was no, the Q&A was for the committee members, not
The council members.
Okay.
So public was for the
Questions, they can ask questions at the end of the presentation.
Did you allow that, but that's not the.
I wouldn't even
My
say-
understanding is public participation, the time for public participation
Is now.
is now. And if we have questions of staff, we may answer those questions or ask those questions during the meeting. But as far as a Q&A with members of the public,
This is not a public.
that's not customary or permitted. So I think if members of the public have some input they want to provide, now is the appropriate time. That would be my thought.
If I might, Mr. Chairman, they obviously have not had a preview of the latest information. So at the end of the presentation by Ms. Burns, they're most likely going to have some questions. I would say that it might be better to have the presentation first and have the public participation after.
I would agree with that.
If I may point
I think much of-
point of order, this is a special meeting, and you do not have a Q&A on the agenda at all. And you do
They
not
can
have
vote to go off the
ability to
agenda.
We
order.
can vote to go off the agenda.
They can go.
But
they
I
can vote
think,
to go
I
off the
think
agenda.
much of the public input, I could be wrong, is that they have not had an opportunity to view this presentation prior to this evening.
Why don't we see the presentation first?
Yeah, that's what I
Well,
would recommend.
in all, yes, we may have to do a little combination of the two because there are people here that have to leave.
Yes.
And I'd like to give them an opportunity
Yeah, and
to have their say.
I came in a little later than everybody
Yes.
else, and there was a tornado warning issued.
Yes, we all our phones went off. So I'll just go down this list and give everyone a chance to speak so that if they have to go to another meeting, they can. Next is Susan Schweitzer.
Good evening, members of the committees. I am actually speaking on behalf of the Norwalk Redevelopment Agency. I also want to be clear, while I understand that the design of the utility relocation is very important, I'm not really here to comment on that. I'm here to comment more on the concept of the above-ground installation as opposed to an underground installation. The Redevelopment Agency for years, almost 50 to be exact, has been working in the South Norwalk area to relocate utilities underground for two reasons. One obviously was aesthetics. The utilities were aging and they were an unattractive element of the streetscape. But also equally important was safety because the utilities are also vulnerable to accidents, weather, etc. We have relocated utilities on all of these adjacent streets, not yet Elizabeth Street obviously, but most recently working on Bay and Raymond for exactly that purpose. And I think that the utility relocation as part of the street improvement and infrastructure improvements have contributed hugely to the private investment that has occurred in that South Norwalk area. So I would like you to consider that as you deliberate on the project. I'm sure there is a design that can be resolved that will satisfactorily relocate the utilities underground. I also have for you a letter from Clark Living, a business that is located on Elizabeth Street in South Main. They would be directly impacted by the proposed design for the overhead utilities and are most concerned about the investment that they've made in the area, both on South Main Street and on Elizabeth Street. I'll leave this for the record.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tony Mobility.
I'll defer my comments to the presentation.
You could, okay. After the presentation, you can ask questions about the presentation. Okay? And we'll limit that to that type of format. Okay? Brenda Penn Williams.
Well, I'm here to say that I'm in favor of the underground lines. Less outages. It's better. The overhead underground lines are much better. You don't have to see all of that. You would just have less outages. Okay, that's it.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Adam Bovinsky.
First, I just want to thank the committee members for giving us this opportunity today to speak. Many of you know me from my past life here at City Hall, but today I'm here as the Executive Director of the Norwalk Housing Authority. This issue of whether or not the power lines go above ground or below ground is something of great importance to the Norwalk Housing Authority. We raised it at our meeting last week, and there was a strong consensus of the board members that putting these power lines underground is truly critical to our community in South Norwalk. First of all, we are in the process of a $150 million redevelopment of Washington Village. That redevelopment, in order to keep it sustainable, requires us to mix low-income, affordable, and market rate units all together. If those market rate units can't be rented at a high rate, then that makes the entire project less sustainable. And I think if you look at these pictures of what the high voltage power lines look like, I think it's pretty clear that they can be quite an eyesore and may bring down the value of the apartments in this community. I also can't not comment on the fact that we're talking about a very dense community, a very densely populated community, as well as, to some extent, a low-income community and moderate-income community. And I think that it's important that we consider not putting such an eyesore in such a community that often feels put upon by the city, where individuals live next to industrial zones and other more urban, or I should say industrial type of buildings and structures. So the Norwalk Housing Authority wants to weigh in heavily in favor of placing these power lines underground. And thank you for your time here today.
Thank you. Sienna DeSanto.
Hello. My name is Sienna DeSantis, and I'm here on behalf of Trinity Financial. We were selected to be partners with the Housing Authority to redevelop Washington Village back in 2013. As Adam mentioned earlier, the new vision of a truly mixed-income community has come to be realized through the recently completed Phase 1, which opened earlier this summer. 22 of which those homes will be market-rate units. Trinity has been in the business of real estate development for over 30 years with a portfolio that spans market-rate housing, affordable housing, and public housing revitalization from Norwalk to New York City, Boston, and cities along the New England border. We take care to design buildings and reposition neighborhoods that are not only beautiful within, but also within the within their surroundings. In our experience, the marketability of a home, as well as the comfort it provides to its residents, can be greatly impacted by the surrounding infrastructure. We are currently in the occupancy stage of the first 2 buildings and are very aware of the sensitivity to this issue during daily interviews with prospective and current residents as they come to visit our leasing offices. We strongly urge you to consider the adverse impact this overhead line will have on the full neighborhood, and we hope that our testimony will persuade the committee to install these systems underground, which will create a benefit for Norwalk, its ability to maintain appeal for current residents, future residents, and the community as a whole. Thank you.
John Romano.
Hello, everyone. John Romano, 179 East Rocks Road, also a harbor, vice chairman of the Harbor Commission. This is kind of funny. I'm listening to everybody advocating for the underground. As I've understood it on all the many meetings that I've heard, that it's the preferred way and route to go is underground. Our only issue is the direction that it's taken. We sat down, Pete and I, with the mayor. We had a discussion. Eversource was pushing and pushing and pushing, looking for some sign-offs, letters to be sent to the siting council, Army Corps, this, that, and the other thing. I'm here to advocate for slowing the process down and actually cancel this or table it for discussion and approval. Because the reality is that Eversource has been less than forthcoming. They have made promises and we've asked them for sit-downs and meetings. The last meeting we had, we told them that it was unacceptable and that we're going to come up with alternative underground routes. We never talked about above ground whatsoever. We prefer to see it go underground too, for all the obvious reasons that were stated here. I'd like to also call the test Ms. Froese, because we're a Norwalk Commission, Harbor and Shellfish. She's never communicated to us. By accident, somebody saw that this meeting was scheduled for tonight. We're never told directly that it was. And we're supposed to be meeting with Eversource sometime. It's been canceled and pushed several times. And now the last communication was November, maybe December, and that hasn't happened. It's like the POCD, the horse before the cart kind of scenario. Hey, Louise. Which was much objection to at a last public hearing. So at the end of the day, we're not against it. We're just against the route as it is. The city spent tons of money putting in new docks. There's more work to be done. The direction that it's going to go is directly under the new city docks that we got $900,000 grant from the Maritime Commission up in it's a state organization. We've burdened the costs and expenses. We also even floated to Eversource to come up with another alternative if there might be some trade-offs if we don't ever have to look at that area again, if they would do dredging now, put a bulkhead. And these were things that were up for discussion, nothing was etched in stone, to come to us in the future to discuss. And that future was supposed to be September, now October, pushed off to November.
That's your 30-second notice.
It needs to take place, so I'm asking you guys to table it for the obvious reasons. No sign-offs.
Who can help me shut this off?
No sign-offs, table the item, please.
Thank you.
14-year-old kid.
Thank you. Diane Loricello.
Good evening. Part of the discussion tonight has to be about the process. As a former Harbor Management Commission member under Bill Collins, we created the Harbor Management Plan in order to make sure that we looked at all of the boards and commissions that would in any way be related to any actions in Norwalk related to the harbor. The fact that the Shellfish Commission and the Harbor Commission has not satisfactorily first signed off and gotten their questions answered before it comes to the council is something that I don't think is something that the city council and the mayor should act upon. So you should table it until that is done. Of the alternatives presented, and I don't think enough have been presented, I am for undergrounding. But right now, I'll tell you where I know it should not go. Number one, it should not go anywhere south of Stroffolino Bridge. Why? Because it is well known, and as many of you know, I'm an environmental consultant. I've done an environmental site assessment for a different client years ago within that area. The Petro oil tanks and the old oil tanks, every spot below the Stroffolino Bridge contains floatable oil that was left in the ground. It was encountered when they tried to begin elevating Water Street years ago under, I believe, forget which DPW, think under Grumman, might have been under DeGangi. And the thing is, why would you want to actually aggravate or begin a bigger problem than you have now? That should be addressed, definitely, by the council, but I don't think Eversource should be allowed to do any construction within that area. Or go to the moon. That's my other 30 seconds. So any alternatives north of Straffolino Bridge make sense as well as in construction and environmental issues, because you're already going to have impacts from the construction of the new walk bridge. Why would you begin deconstructing other places south of the bridge that could encounter additional environmental hazards or hazardous materials and oil and fuel oil, gasolines, south of the bridge? I also want to tell you, as far as an environmental justice thought, is adding to doing more construction and uncovering of materials. I want to see, and this council needs to see, the environmental impacts that were done by Eversource and their consultants before you even attempt to look at anything south of Straffolino Bridge. You also need, in my opinion, each alternative, which hasn't been clarified, of the economic impacts of each of those alternatives as far as disruption, like you're trying to do for the actual walk bridge. The last thing I wanted to tell you is many years ago when I was much younger, I was a member and chairwoman of the Sierra Club Fairfield County Group. I have 30 seconds to go, thank you, and I could finish this tale. They were then called CLMP. They stated that they could not put underground high power, this was even higher power than this 115 kilovolt, underground because of the distance. Sierra Club and a student that I had.
You've had your 3 minutes, let's strictly adhere to it in respect to
I'll
everyone else.
finish my sentence if I may.
Okay.
We proved that they were not telling the truth about that, and for the next, that was Bethel to Norwalk. From Norwalk to Milford, they undergrounded it in Norwalk because of that, under Alex Nutt.
Thank you. Joe Perella.
I'll defer to the
When you say defer, meaning you're giving up your opportunity to speak afterwards, you just could ask questions?
Yes.
Okay. I want to make sure we're all on the same page. Deb Goldstein.
Deb Goldstein, and I'm actually here able to speak on behalf of the 3rd Taxing District and not just by myself. I'm going to make one quick observation that I would hope you wouldn't come out of my time. On the very second page of this presentation, there's a statement which is not truthful about whether this line solely provides all the power to the 3rd Taxing District. That is incorrect. All right, so just so you understand that, you're not always receiving 100% truthful information. So I'm struck here tonight that everybody that's come to speak to you, with the exception of, I think, of Diane Monticello, came on behalf of an organization. There's not one ordinary citizen that's in this room talking to you about what they think or don't think. And I can tell you, many of them have bought their homes with overhead power lines in the neighborhood, all of them. And they appreciate the quick restoration of power that happens when you have overhead lines, okay? When you're talking about environmental justice issues, the aesthetics of the harbor pale in comparison to the idea that environmental contamination by disturbing this part might in fact impact your shellfish business for the entire city. It might impede all of the recreational uses of the harbor and so on and so forth. We have been going back and forth and writing letters to the agencies for months now. And let's be clear, the choice here tonight isn't between overhead and underground. That ship sailed. The choice now is which of the underground paths you ultimately are going to agree to. They're all more expensive than overhead, so let's throw the idea about cost out the window, all right? There's very real concerns, and I agree with Ms. Loricella, about putting that group exactly where it is. And I'm going to leave a thought with you because I'm not going to have the full time to go through all of the historical, the aesthetic, and the other issues that were in the letter that every one of you received this afternoon from the 3rd Taxing District, okay? There's 2 deep pits that are going to be on either side of the harbor to allow this HDD path to be drawn. They will be filled with what they call drill mud, which has chemicals that the consultant to the Harbor Commission told you is bad to introduce into the environment, and you cannot guarantee it's going to be contained. That storm we had last week, with epic amounts of flooding, you're going to tell me that they're going to be able to contain the mud in that pit with that amount of water coming in or an event like that? We are playing with fire, trying to contaminate that side, digging under Vets Park, which is known garbage dump, with possible toxins in there that have never been fully evaluated in an area that has known to have hat manufacturing with mercury in its processes. I can go on. The considerations are huge. For economic justice, pollution beats aesthetics every time.
Thank you. Steve Clutton.
Good evening. I'm not here speaking on behalf of any commissions, just myself. I'd like to echo what Susan Schweitzer stated. I think for purely aesthetic reasons and also for impacts on other properties, I think it's important that the utilities do go underground. And looking at the plans distributed on the overhead, I think it will be a big negative in the long term for the city. Where the exact route goes underground, I'll leave that up to others to decide. But I would recommend going with the underground route for the betterment of the city.
Thank you. Mr. Clutton. Steve Rust.
I'll defer to questions afterward.
Bruce Beinfeld.
Bruce Beinfeld. I've been an architect and had my office in South Norwalk for over 30 years, and been involved in a number of projects in South Norwalk. And through that time period, what I've gained an understanding of is that the historic fabric of South Norwalk is probably its greatest asset in terms of attracting people to that neighborhood. The path above ground for the, that's been designated as a possible option for the utilities travels right through the middle of a historic district and would have a extremely negative impact on that district. Currently, I'm working for the on a project on the corner of South Main Street and Elizabeth Street for the Clark Company. They indicated to me today that if their high power lines go down Elizabeth Street in front of their project, their interest in pursuing that option would be significantly diminished. So I just wanted to point out that for a number of reasons that the above ground option I'm against. Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, Eric Raines.
Eric Raines. I guess to Bruce's follow-up on a little bit of one of his points, the economic devastation that will come if the overhead option is pursued literally begins today. When you start looking at significant operations within not only South Norwalk, but within the city, who are making decisions today about their future in the city based on this topic. And just imagine the snowball effect of what transpires after today. I live in South Norwalk, my business is in South Norwalk. I am on several agencies within the town, but I'm here as a citizen, and I express sincere concern about what would begin to happen to the decades of effort that has gone into making South Norwalk such a viable part of Norwalk as it's becoming and as it can be. The effect of this isn't only on South Norwalk, it's on Norwalk. And if a component of an entity like Norwalk fails, then we all fail. And so I appreciate the Harbor Commission comment that they're not here to say no to the underground lines, that it's the route. So if there's enough information to focus on the route and take the overhead component off the table, I know the business community that I deal with would feel a lot better about the decisions they're making in South Norwalk.
Thank you. That is the end of our public participation. And we'll go to new business. Now, we stand the rules for the questions and answers.
Everything's first and then suspend the rules.
Okay. We're going to do the presentation on Eversource high-power power line relocation resulting from the walk bridge construction. Lisa Burns will be speaking on that subject. I ask everyone to hold their questions until the end, because it will flow better, and we may answer the very questions you've had at the end. So I will say personally, before we get into that, it's nice to hear this room agrees with everything being underground, which is the impression I'm getting from most of the speakers here. And we are trying to find the best alternative to do that. So, with that, Lisa.
Thank you. Hi. My name is Lisa Burns. I'm the principal engineer for the Department of Public Works. I wanted to thank the mayor, the chairs of both the Public Works Committee and Parks for calling this joint meeting together to brief the Common Council and the public on the Walk Bridge High Tower removal status. This is a staff briefing. This is not an Eversource presentation. This is a staff briefing. I'm the point person for the staff to speak. There's other staff here tonight who could also probably answer questions, who may have better subject matter expertise in a particular area. So if you go to the Q&A, they're here. This effort has been a collaboration of all city agencies, departments, and stakeholders. And so I appreciate, John, you mentioning just holding questions to the end, because I think a lot of the different things we've heard through the city, through different ways of commenting, I think when we unfold the process and what's happened, a lot of the questions can be answered in that format. So thank you. I think we all here know that the high towers need to be removed in order to facilitate the construction of the walk bridge. The two high towers that were on the cover slide, you saw, those are in the way. You can't move a crane around the high towers. And what's on the high towers? The high towers and the catenary lines associated with those high towers. Well, first of all, they need to be moved by 2020. That's the commitment that the Metro North, who's on those towers, with their communication and signal cables, needs to be off those towers at that time. And Eversource needs to meet a commitment to be off those towers with their two 115 kilovolt transmission lines, which provide power to Third Taxing District, East Norwalk, through CMAQ. So Eversource provides the power through a cooperative, but they are the actual power company that provides the power to East Norwalk and Southwestern Connecticut. There are several regulatory and permit approvals that are required for this project, and I appreciate the Harbor Management Commission and their input into the and the Shellfish Commission input into the process. There's to do any of these relocations, whether it's the Eversource relocation or the Metro North temporary or permanent signal relocations underneath the river, both of those efforts require deep land use and water resources permits, which is a structured dredging and fill permit. So there will be consultation with the Harbor Management Commission through that process, also with the Army Corps, the State of Connecticut Department of Aquaculture, and the Shellfish Commission. Also, to construct these lines, a deep stormwater pollution and control plan needs to be provided under a construction permit for both the Metro North and the Eversource lines. The Army Corps of Engineer permit that's required, the Common Council in August of 2018 has already approved the Metro North lines being relocated under the river. And when I say approved, that means the Common Council approved the mayor to send a letter to the Army Corps that says that that the city has no objection to Metro North, or the DOT in this case, submitting their application to the Army Corps. That's all that the authorizations entail. Eversource needs the same letter to submit their application for the river crossing to the Army Corps of Engineers. In addition to those permits, Eversource lines also need to go to the Connecticut Siting Council. The 50% of the relocation of these lines is paid for through the Connecticut DOT and the Federal Highway Administration. But Eversource is responsible for paying the other half. And by Eversource, that means the ratepayers pay the other half. So of particular importance is the cost to the ratepayers and the impact on the ratepayers. So as noted in the comment period or the public input period, overhead options are significantly more expensive than the underground options.
The other way around.
Other way.
Other way.
Oh, sorry.
At least overground is less expensive.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Underground.
Yeah. Underground is more expensive. Thank you. Okay. So the action before the Public Works Committee is the one highlighted. It's the same letter, just dealing with the Army Corps of Engineers. Mayor sends a letter saying no objection for the city, for Eversource to submit their application. Their application may or may not be approved. It's just to keep the process moving forward. And again, the other permits required do require input from Harbor Management Commission, Shellfish Commission, and Aquaculture, in addition to Army Corps. So that'd be the DEP, Structures, Dredging, and Fill permit, which is not before this body. Let's give you some background now on what happened. So back in the spring of 2016, the DOT commissioned their own engineer, HNTB, some of you guys have met with HNTB before, commissioned their engineer to examine routing options on behalf of Eversource without really Eversource's input. And in June of July of 2016, I had the pleasure of walking all of those routes with the DOT and their consultant and pointed out a lot of issues. And it didn't really, city's input didn't really get brought into that report. They submitted the DOT's engineer prepared a report, a draft report with 7 options to reroute the lines, which were largely overhead. Of course, that was the driver, I think, being the least expensive options for the DOT. Back in July of 2016, the city made extensive comments on the draft report. We were really concerned with DOT limiting the social impacts on parks, businesses, properties, residents, and the environment. And in August of 2016, the DOT issued their final report, and it was unfortunately not substantially different than the report that they had previously prepared. And I can walk, there's a whole, in some of the points brought up about social impacts, environmental impacts, impacts on the community, in some extent were addressed in this report. The city didn't feel like it was addressed adequately, but these are the routing options that that the DOT's engineer had come up with. And I think you can see the mouse on both, so if I point at one versus the other, I think you can follow along with the mouse. And there's 7 options that they went through. So right now, the high towers are here and here, and the power and the signal cables are on these poles that run along the railroad tracks, those big kind of, I don't know, silver gray monopoles that you see through the city. So in this, so say, I'm not gonna go through all the options, but in essence, this was an overhead option going up the wastewater plant over to Oyster Shell Park, coming down by the mall, going overhead all the way down behind Sheffield, Corset Factory, I think, and rising back up on, this was the Danbury branch here, and rising back up down here on the main line, somewhere down in the Washington Street area. Some other overhead options were this green that went down over Liberty Square, over what was Coastwise Marine, landing where the IMAX is overhead, and coming and rising back up behind the Ironworks building. On this sheet shows 2 underground options. It went underground, across the river, somehow through the Maritime Aquarium, and rose back up onto the Danbury line over here on these poles. And then there was another underground option where it undergrounds through the Penna property and comes up and rises. And these are the options, again, north of the Stropholina Bridge, rises behind the Ironworks. I just like to point out in this scenario, this last scenario, the back end of the Ironworks building would have to be knocked off for that to work. So you know where you drive under the Ironworks and you can go in, that piece would have to come off the back of the building. Options 5, 6, and 7, again, overhead up South Smith Street, up and through Oyster Shell Park and down, overhead South Smith Street, crossing further south of Oyster Shell Park and down, and then an overhead option that is similar to the one that is shown as the alternative aerial option that goes over Liberty Square, over the tenants in this building, down into the park, over to Elizabeth and rising back up onto the tracks behind the police station. So after that report came out with all of the aerial options and some of the same things that the public spoke out about today about the aerial, I don't think aerial in any way, shape, or form is what, you know, if it's this neighborhood impacted, if it's that neighborhood impacted, there's neighborhood impacts for aerial lines. So the city decided to bypass the DOT and go directly to Eversource and start dialoguing directly with the entity that had to ultimately do the project. And so the mayor's development team at the time, in September 2016, met directly with Eversource on the routing options and preferences. And those concerns about those social impacts that I had listed before were the drivers of that. And the preferred option was discussed as being the underground option. And we looked at the underground options with Eversource that DOT had come up with and deemed like the one that knocked the back end of the Spinnaker property off was not going to be one that could move forward. Or go through the aquarium, another example. So Eversource began working on a preliminary underground route. And at that time, Parks Department and the Harbor Management Commission were also briefed. The criteria they were given with the southern route was to hug the, to have the least amount of park impact and to have the least amount of impact on development of future properties. And it doesn't, these routing options don't just get engineered overnight. You're not just going and sketching on a pad and looking and saying, okay, we can just do this here today. You know, it takes, to go from a concept to an actual preliminary design takes months of work You have to locate things like utilities. You have to look at property impacts. You have to look at feasibility. There's a lot that goes into actually doing a design. And by August, so between October and August, Eversource went out and did the due diligence on the option that the city asked them to look at. And in August of 2017, the Eversource came in and gave a briefing to parks folks, public works, planning, and mayors and others on the route for the permitting. So in August, it wasn't quite ready yet, but this is the alignment. The if you guys are familiar with 25 Van Zandt, which is called Windbaum's property, right now the first proposal they came up with was to underground off of the poles behind 25 Van Zandt and go underground into Vets Park as close to the right-of-way line of the state road as possible. So hugging as closely and staying as much as possible out of the park. There'd be a horizontal directional drill under the river and rising back between 70 Water Street and 90 Water Street. And when I say rising, I mean the horizontal directional drill ends. And then they would continue undergrounding in a regular duck bank down Elizabeth Street, coming through the police department and rising behind the police department, back up onto the tracks. What that looked like from a profile standpoint was the river bottom. I can't see very well, so I have to look here. The river bottom is here. The water line is about here. I'm approximating, 'cause I'm trying to read this, but the river bottom here, the actual, and that's about 20 feet below grade. And then they were going to have the horizontal directional drill about 45 feet down, so about 25 feet or so below the bottom of the river. And what that looked like for the docks at Vets Park was the horizontal directional drill landed in between the dock pilings, and again, where the dock pilings are about 40 feet deep, right? So, continuing on what happened after that. In fall of 2017, Eversource began in earnest now their engineering design in anticipation of a third quarter 2018 Connecticut Siting Council application, which would take about 2 or 3 months, and a fourth quarter Army Corps application. And the Army Corps permit takes 12 to 18 months to get. And the Army Corps application only applies to the river crossing. In late February and early March, the Harbor Commission met with city officials, with their consultant, and sent correspondence to the city about their concerns related to the proposed Eversource relocation alignment. And in March of 2018, responding to the Harbor Commission concerns, the city requested that Eversource redesign the route not to impact the docks, and so that the lines would go below the dock pilings and deeper under the Norwalk River. And in March and April of 2018, Eversource collaborated and met with Race Engineering, and Race Engineering are the dock designers and construction residents and engineers, and worked together on a new design, alignment, and profile. And in the spring of 2018, Race Engineering and Parks Department reviewed the alignment with the new alignment, and didn't see any, didn't have any. We're pretty much concurred with the with the design. In June of 2018, Eversource completed its redesign, which goes below the pile bottoms and is also consistent with the park's master plan. And I'll show how that works. So the pits for so for every 1 foot to go deeper under the river, the pits, you have to go, you say 4 feet? 50, yeah. 50.
Horizontal.
Yeah.
Because of the physics.
Yeah, okay, have to go back 15 feet. So that pulled received the pits further back towards the entrance of Goldstein Place and the Vets Park entrance. And then it traveled the same alignment and landed again between 70 and 90 Water Street, along as close as it could be on the property line, again, so that those two parcels could be developed at the conclusion of the project. And then continued down along Elizabeth Street and rising back behind the police station. There was some discussion that was brought up in the spring about, well, why can't you go this way down towards the basketball court and go this way down Elizabeth Street? And that was deemed not feasible for a number of reasons. First, there's a 4F permit process that needs to be adhered to for the Federal Highway Administration, and not to have adverse impacts on public properties, and especially those that have recreational uses. This was going to put a permanent encumbrance going underground through the park and across, and that was not going to be acceptable for funding purposes, and wouldn't pass muster. Further, when Eversource laid that line, when they laid out that route, it took 90 Water Street, which people call the Spinnaker property, totally off the ability to be ever returned to a waterfront development use again. So that property was never going to be able to be used as a development parcel for prime waterfront space. So what does the alignment look like? It's a real deep dive now. Again, here's the channel bottom at -20, and now they went 30 feet below. They went as far as they could go until they hit rock. So they're sitting on top of the rock at that point. The horizontal directional drill starts here, takes a deep dive, 30 feet under the river, and rises back out up. This part is actually the construction part, but it actually continues to underground at about elevation. The top of the pipe is probably around 7.5 feet below Elizabeth Street. And what does that look with the Vets Park pilings? It looks, again, this is been reviewed with Race Engineering, Parks Department. At this point, this has been relocated about 8 feet below the bottom of the park, about below the docks bottom of their pilings. And when I spoke about consistency with the Betts Park Master Plan, this is the Betts Park Master Plan. I don't know that much about it, but here are the docks that have been built already. And if we zoom in here, the Betts Park Master Plan envisioned lining up Goldstein Place with the Betts Park entrance. Right now they're skewed, and there's a good chance through the Walk Bridge project that there'll be a new traffic signal at this location, because behind Liberty Square, that's where the state has taken property for construction staging. So as we proceed forward, we may see a signal here, but Eversource, subject to Connecticut Siting Council's concurrence on cost, has agreed to restore this area to be consistent with the Betts Park Master Plan. And I should also point out, I'm gonna go the other way. I'm gonna go back. As we worked with Eversource, because down Elizabeth Street, I call Elizabeth Street kind of the hole in the donut right now. Susan Schweitzer spoke about underground utilities. Elizabeth Street is kind of the only street that doesn't have underground utilities in this area. And because the current infrastructure down Elizabeth Street is very old, and it's most likely in the way of these very big duck banks that Eversource needs to put in to relocate the transmission lines. We've been talking about working with them collaboratively to reconstruct Elizabeth Street with underground utilities, not just the high towers, but the ones that are there now on the telephone poles, and do a road reconstruction project at the conclusion of the project. Skipping ahead, so I'm back. Okay. So there's a lot of encumbrances already on the Norwalk River, of utilities crisscrossing the river. We have an existing Frontier cable here, an existing electrical cable. This is by the Sheffield Apartments. We have very large sewer siphons, a 42 and a 36-inch barrel sewer siphon, and some old abandoned sewers. So there's actually 4 pipes crossing here right now. And I'd like to point out this siphon facility deck. You probably don't know what it is when you're down on Ann Street. You probably think it's the fishing pier or the observation platform. But it's actually a major facility for the wastewater treatment plant. It has 6 huge tie gates on it. I think they're 60-inch. It has substantial infrastructure as far as instrumentation and control beneath it. It has giant sluice gates. You can see the stems of them when you're there sticking up through the deck. But this is an example of something that's built over something, a recreational facility that's built over something that needs to be maintained, and it's critical infrastructure. That siphon carries, in the last rainstorm, that siphon probably carried 50 million gallons of sewage, but there's something built over it. Here we come down to the Walk Bridge. On the north side, there's already some existing communication cables, and there's some on the south side as well. There's a a water line that serves, it's the main water line getting over to the beach area from SNU. It actually goes under the docks on North Water Street. I get confused between which is the seaport and which is the vessel, the aquarium vessel, but it's, I think the vessel, the aquarium's vessel. This is the other seaport dock, and this is a major communication line for the city that has, it's a fiber communication, and it also has the city's traffic fiber in that underwater crossing. And you can see they're all close to different recreational activities and uses. What is coming is a lot on the river. What's coming here, this is a new walk bridge here. And these are the lines, this line here, this is an open cut line for the temporary power cables that was approved by the council to put the Army Corps application in to go with an open cut for the temporary back in August. These lines here are also horizontal directional drill lines that the mayor's been authorized to send a letter in to have to the Army Corps to allow these lines to put in. These are the permanent lines for the walk bridge.
Lisa?
Yes.
Don't mean to interrupt. We have another meeting at 7
Yeah.
o'clock. So if you could wrap this up to give people 15 minutes for some questions and answers. And I don't want to confuse you by taking you out.
Yeah, no. I just want to point out that the light blue here are major platforms that need to be constructed, way bigger than any kind of dock structure for construction of the walk bridge. They're on each corner of the bridge, and they're down here at 70 and 90 Water Street. 70 and 90 Water Street are going to be acquired for walk bridge construction. The lift span of the bridge is going to be constructed down here, and a barge is going to pull up to this platform and going to be floated into place 2 times. All of these big structures that are being built around these utilities that aren't even as deep as the ones proposed under Betts Park have to hold something like a 300-ton crane. I don't know, maybe someone here knows better than I do, but I tried to Google it, but the Island Bell maybe weighed 70 tons. I don't even know. That's what I thought, something like that. And what that wrecked the visitor dock. So imagine these giant work platforms have to support a 300-ton crane, and they're being built around utilities. And the point is that things are built around utilities in the water all the time. So here we are, next steps. We're wrapping it up.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Eversource, we said at the beginning, has an obligation to move transmission lines off the high towers for the walk bridge and to energize the new lines before 2020. It takes 1 year to get the Army Corps permit. The Army Corps permit needs to be in place by 2019 if it's going to go underwater. Construction can only occur between November and February by the Army Corps. So this application needs to be in, if it's going to be underground, no later than into the early fourth quarter. Army Corps has the longest lead time. Again, I said what the council action is at the next meeting. It's to send a letter on behalf of the Norwalk indicating no objection to the Army Corps submitting the permit application for relocation of the lines under the Norwalk River. And if not approved, Eversource is obligated to the DOT to submit something to be off the high towers by 2020. And these aerial depictions that are included in the presentation are the same aerial depictions that were available back, and the Harbor Management Commission came in the end of July this year, when there was a briefing meeting. They worked on them a little bit more to give more views. This is one where it comes down Elizabeth overhead. This is 90 water. The base of this pole is 10 to 12 feet wide. There is an option if we want to go underground but only overhead over the river, then it has to step down on these from a 200-foot pole down to a 100-foot pole, and then can go underground under Elizabeth. There's hybrid options. And then I think in the package you've seen some of the other renderings of, this is all aerial. This one is stepping down and going back underground at Betts Park. So it would not be overhead in front of Liberty Square in this scenario. This is, again, this is a all aerial, and then this is the hybrid if they can't get the Army Corps application in.
Thank you.
So.
These configurations, these configurations are outside in much bigger format, so you can see it much more clearly. So please feel free to do that. In listening to everyone here this evening, everyone seems, as I said, seems to be going in the same direction as underground's the way to go. And that's great, because I think it's a blessing to the city. It gets those towers out of South Norwalk, and it gets it out of the historic districts, and that's wonderful. But to avoid any confusion, I want to make it clear that the council is the one that's making the decision here, and we are the ones that are going to authorize the mayor to enter into an agreement or sign documents to get things done. So to the extent we can work together and not confuse Eversource, we will get you more information, everyone here. But to have people going to Eversource on their own and saying this is the way it should be is wrong. The decision will be made here. We value everyone as a source of information, a resource to us. Please communicate with us, and if it requires you're coming to our monthly meeting, DPW meeting, and we allocate 15 minutes to this topic, we can do that. But let's communicate together a lot more and move this through properly and keep the council well informed so that we can make decisions. And I know from history and experience that Mr. Hempstead's going to have a question. I'm sure of it. So with that, I'm going to ask the council first if they have any questions on the presentation. No? Okay.
Just the presentation.
Just.
Because I will have questions, but I think we still have them.
Okay. So then I will turn to people that have questions. And I think John Romano.
I liked it. You did an excellent job. That was a great presentation. There was only one thing that I had a little objection to, was the last meeting that we had, they said that we're gonna go down 40 feet and not stop at, the 30 was on the original submission of plans. They said they were gonna go 40. Our problem is not the depth so much. You could go down 100 still. It's the issue that's going right through our docks. So my question is, what kind of mitigation, what kind of safeguards are being put into any kind of approval? That's one. The other is, if we're going and sending letters to the Army Corps, is there provisions in that, and we understand that it's subject to it. We have a harbor management plan, we have harbor management concerns. We're advocating for the city of Norwalk, for all its people, and the use of a harbor, and we feel that's going to be an impediment later on. So if we're going to get an approval and a sign off to the Corps of Engineers, are we also, part of this, is it going to the Siting Council too? And the Siting Council has like super duper powers over the world. Once it gets in their hands, even though they're saying in the committee, because we talked about this at a meeting that we had, that they would have their public hearing in Norwalk, which is great. At the end of the day, it's their decision. we're now out of the loop. So we don't want to get pigeonholed, and by doing this way, and I understand the urgency, but it's putting us in a critical scenario where there could be adverse effects to the future use. Now, the way the direction is, and that straight line coming off of between the two properties, or going down Elizabeth Street, we were told by the Eversource that they could not take any turns. We found to the contrary. We investigated other municipalities, other underground utilities that were put in, and it was totally, we were led wrong. And now we've been waiting for months and months and months since our last meeting here, and they're supposed to come back to us and sit down and come up with new plans, which they've been stalling and stalling and putting off, and now we're at this juncture. This is part of the approval process, and we have an objection to going that length without being vetted and them coming up with alternative routes. It's not fair to the city, it's not fair to our commissions. You may as well just disband them if you're not gonna listen to them. And it's not like we weren't in communication. We've been in major communication, letter after letter after letter. I think John Pinto's arms are tired from typing all the letters that he sent to them and really not got the right answers back, and making meeting dates and requests that they didn't follow up with except for extension of time. So I just wanted to leave you with that thought.
Thank you.
Yes, I'd like to, if you can turn the slides on again, and I want to make a correction on one of your slides. If you can go back several slides, keep going. We had sort of the approval process. Keep going. There's item number 3 down here. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Tony, remember that page it was? Oh, here it is, right here. Oh, wait, no.
This one?
Go back.
This one, right?
Yeah, it's the Eversource routing background connection. It said in March 2018, responding to the Harbor Commission's concerns, the city requests Eversource redesign the route so that the lines in the river go below dock pilings and deeper into the river. That was never, ever said by the commission. I have letters documenting the fact that we wanted to avoid the visitors dock at all costs. Never did we say go deeper under the river. I don't know where they came up with that explanation. I have records, I have letters that we've sent indicating that we object to anything going in and around or underneath those pylons. Because you talked about value, devaluing city property. We've just devalued our city property. You talk about other people's property, but you devalued the city's property by allowing this to happen, because now we are limited on future design and building in that area. We don't know what type of designs we'll need in the future with regard to the needs of the city as a communication hub in that area. That's a strategic area. That's our invitation for voters coming across the Sound and into Norwalk. We're going to be limited on what we're going to be building in the future, because as Eversource's, in their own words, we could build there, but we are going to be limited to their decision on what we will build or what can build. So that really devalues our future plans tremendously. So, with that, I would definitely like to say, because as I have documentation indicate that they did not, and we did not indicate that, so that the lines of the river go below the dock pilings deeper under the North River. We objected to going under and going through the pilings.
We're going to try and end this by 5 to 7, so who else has a question? Jackie.
Thanks, John. So I actually have a question. I'm concerned about the vaults. There's been different versions of the plans that I'm referencing. I realize an old one, but it's got the dimensions on here. I just want to make sure that I understand what the dimensions are. If I'm reading this correctly, there's a 20-foot long either pipe or part of the vault that it says that it's going to be at 0 feet or sea level, but it's 10 feet tall. And I'm not quite sure when I'm looking at this based on the new plan where that vault is located and whether it is above ground or below ground or some combination. So that's the first part of the question. My first question. I have a second question if that's okay. If this needs to be reviewed or looked at, that's fine. and I can move on
I
with
think
the
I
second.
can, you want me to answer that one?
Yeah, if you
I
could.
think, the vaults during construction, the activities will occur above ground. When construction concludes, they will be at grade level.
Okay.
So that there'll be access points, like big manholes to get back, you know, into those structures.
So the second part of my question is, then, according to the standards for electrical utilities and marine environments being located underground, there's some specific maintenance that needs to be done on a fairly regular basis and having access to the vaults when they're buried. Has Eversource spoken to what the maintenance schedule is proposed to be and what the access around the vaults are going to be? Is it going to be a restricted area that nobody can go near? Is it going to have a chain link fence around it or anything like that? So that's the question.
No, those should just look like I said, just like the high.
Just like on Wall Street, perhaps.
Right, like Wall Street, or you know, Eversource was in today working with the person right beside you, Tom Little, to talk about maintenance that needs to happen on the Ely to something line, I forget where, but it's just it's you know, getting access as how often do they do that in maintenance, Tom? Did they mention that today?
Once a year.
Yeah.
So on Wall Street, for example, they usually come out 3 or 4 times a year because there's a lot of flooding on Wall Street or with the water table and everything like that. I would just caution the council on reviewing this in the future, that Eversource provides what are the restrictions when they do that maintenance and for how long it takes. Sometimes on Wall Street it takes several days. And
We're well aware Wall Street's a unique animal.
Very
They're trying to upgrade the lines there.
We'll look into it and get
Thank
back to you. I think Diane has a question.
No, I just,
Sir.
Eversource told us that in Milford, they ran the line right under their ramps and everything. So we called Milford. And Milford said they stopped them the first time that they saw the drawing. It was stopped. And they said, you will not go under there, because as soon as you do that, they don't call it a right-of-way, but what happens is you got to stay a certain amount of feet away from their cables. And if you're going to do any changes, you have to get permission from them. So you basically gave our docks to Eversource. You know, it's I don't understand why this wasn't stopped in the beginning.
Good point. Can you talk to Eversource about that, or can you, and clarify that?
It's just like any utility you're working around. Like we showed the work platforms on the huge work platforms, the docks that are built over the water line. We don't need express permission to do anything in the water from Eversource. We need to work and know where they're located, but we don't need their permission.
Okay, they've said that.
They did say
That's
that.
not what they said.
They said it to us that we have to talk to them
Excuse me.
before we can do anything, once those cables are in. They have to submit our drawings, we have to submit all this stuff before we can do it. And incidentally, those pipes that they're putting those cranes on, it's over 100 foot on the east side that they're driving them down.
Thank you. We will look into that, get back to you.
You had your hand.
Joe Barella?
No,
Oh, good.
no, go ahead, Joe.
No, he doesn't have a question.
Pam Parkington, 12 Old Saugatuck Road, East Norwalk. I'm also a third taxing district commissioner. I'm here as a citizen. I just don't understand why Eversource, I know it's the cheapest way, it's the fastest way, but why did they choose to go straight through our brand new docks? And we're gonna lose those docks because Eversource, there is a variance around every cable, underground cable. They own those docks now, as Pete says. I think that's ridiculous to give that away. Can they be moved? Can these lines be moved? Is this written in stone now?
We will look into that and get back to you.
Well, I have to say that that's not correct information. So
Well, let's get a more detailed response.
To that point, if I don't want to jump, so you're saying there are no variances around the wire line?
Just like any other utility, we
No,
have to.
that's wrong. Eversource
Okay, excuse me.
admitted, because there's 35 feet right away on both sides of the line, and they admitted that that was the case at the last meeting, from their mouths.
Okay, excuse me,
Yeah,
instead of interrupting, let us clarify that, and we'll send the memo back to the
Okay, just
various
let you know.
commissions. That's a good point.
I have
Well,
questions that
you'll be the
don't
last
necessarily need to be answered, but I just want you to hear them. They're really for the council. I want to make sure you understand it and are clear that this project is not actually part of the Lock Bridge. It is a project of independent utility as defined by the statute. I understand it's tied. Do you understand the fact that this subject was not subject to any environmental review underneath the Walk Bridge EA because it's an independent project? And do you now understand that the CSC permit everybody's talking about is actually an application to get a declaratory ruling that no certificate of environmental compatibility or public need is necessary? And that normally the CSC application would be applied first and the Section 408 permit would come after. Whether you know that or not, you ought to take it into consideration. I also would like to invite Ms. Burns to come in to the 3rd Taxing District. We'll happily explain how we purchase power and how the power is delivered to the 3rd Taxing District, because we're still not presenting it correctly to the public. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We can go on and on and on with this, but we unfortunately have another meeting at 7 o'clock, so we're going to adjourn this meeting and take a 5-minute break and start another meeting. So I thank you for all your thoughts, and I'm very pleased to hear that we all agree it should go under the river.